So anyway, in like 1996 and 1997, I created many anarchist websites in Korean language with anarchist information. So when this internet thing first introduced to Korea, it was like a new world. It was like a whole new sphere where I could do a lot of interesting stuff. And then I searched, anarchism, and then there were no anarchist material written in Korean. There were many material in English or other languages, but none in Korean. And so I started translating. Translation of all the stuff into Korean, and then I created several websites. And then this logo is about our non-Serbian website, which was targeting at anti-militarism. And we from there we spread out our anarchist actions into many social actions. In 1970s and 1980s, there were no anarchist movement existed, but then like radical social movement became, it started. The people's movement started in 1970s to bring about like radical changes into Korean society. And so in 1990s, it became really strong, like in early 1990s. Well, in 1990, it joined with like labor movement, and then in 1990, it joined with like different like people's movement and anarchist movement, the women's movement, a different kind of liberation movement joined, and then all the people's movement was really strong. And so in 1990s and 20s, when we started this anarchist movement, there was this big debate whether we take the path of only anarchist movement, or we join this big social movement and strengthen our power and radicalize the society. And so some of them, well, this is a little photo that we were doing right after 9/11. The U.S. invaded Afghanistan, and then I started this campaign. Please, don't invade Afghanistan. And so we started peace movement, and then you can see it's a critical mass movement in South Korea. So in Seoul, we have this critical mass movement where, massive group bicycle riding, we do it every month. And so we still do it. So if you are interested in, then come to, when you are in Seoul, bring out your bicycle and go to the Central Gwanghwamun Park in last Saturday of every month at 4 o'clock. Then you can join this group riding. It's one other thing that we do. And there were like other anarchist things that we do. For example, there are so many, but like guerrilla gardening kind of stuff, or food not bombs, or blood sisters thing. It's making alternative menstruation products, actually sewing menstruation pad, washable, reusable cotton pad. And it was a big actually movement in South Korea. You can see this photo workshop where participants actually are sewing the menstruation pad. Before that movement started, you know, like Korea is a very male-dominating society, and women, you know, patriarchy is everywhere, and then, you know, women cannot say menstruation. The word menstruation is like a taboo word, and so there was this menstruation festival where like we celebrate, you know, this visitor. Anyway, so we went a little bit further, and then, you know, when you saw that instead of like buying disposable menstruation pad, you know, it's bad for the environment, it's bad for your body, and you know, it's only like making the corporation richer, and so let's stop, you know, spending money on that, and let's do everything in a DIY way. And these blood sisters, or in Korean language, 피자매 연대. Yeah. Actually, yeah, it was a very strong movement from 2003 to 2012. Like it lasted 10 years, and then we gave more than 100 workshops everywhere. We would travel everywhere in Korea, you know, teach them how to make, and then, you know, it was really fun. If you want to know more about that, I can, you know, tell you like hours and hours. You can see this, little kid is sewing. Actually, she was like 6 years old, but then, you know, she knew how to sew, and so actually she made one at that day. And her mother is also sewing. And then when I started this movement, I didn't know how to sew, but then later I became an expert. And so I made like, you know, more than hundreds of them. Like, it's a great gift item too. And people love it. It's like there is only one, you know, menstruation pad that, you know, you can, yeah, make it anyway. Yeah. Next picture. So yeah, so virtually no anarchist movement existed until like 1980s, but then 1990s somehow, like as the Korean society became more democratized, but not at all. It's still a dictatorship, but then, you know, like we had to do our own thing, and this thing is graffiti, or like artwork that we did on like squat buildings. Squat movement, yeah, it was there 2000s too. So many different kind of movement actually sprout. When I guess this liberal president Kim Dae-jung became the president in 1997. Like before that, it was just a military dictatorship, and then it was really oppressive. But like Kim Dae-jung, you know, he won the Nobel Peace Prize. He had the talks with the North Kim Jong-il, and the general, you know, atmosphere was like, okay, we have the freedom of speech, we have the, you know, people's right, we can enjoy some of the human rights too, and then, you know, many like alternative movements started, including anarchist movement, and so it was very active, very fun, and very spontaneous. So like when people ask me, because I was like one of the first anarchists after the whole thing in the 1990s. So like those journalists would often ask me, how many anarchists are there in Korea? How the heck can I know? But then on the internet, there were many anarchist individuals who identify themselves as anarchists. Not necessarily they didn't do like things out on the street, but then, you know, they started like identifying themselves as anarchists in the from the late 1990s, and in the 2000s there were so many. So I would say safe to say that there are more than 10,000 anarchists in South Korea. yeah, and still, I guess, there are that many, but as a collective movement, it's not that strong. They're all like individuals scattered all around. I don't know. But if I go to Busan or the cities like Gwangju or Daejeon in Korea, I would meet up with those anarchists, like group of anarchists, like 10 people. And then we do like, you know, like demonstrations together and different kind of actions together. And this is a little village in Pyeongtaek. Pyeongtaek is a big city south of Seoul, and actually farmers used to live inside this tiny village. About 500 farmers used to live in the village of Daechuri. And then suddenly Korean government announced this plan to relocate the Yongsan U.S. military base station in Seoul, downtown Seoul, down to this area. And so it was actually U.S. military's plan to expand that army base to consolidate all the scattered U.S. military bases into a big one in west coast of Korea. And so in 2004, these farmers started resisting against the expansion of the U.S. Garrison. It was called Camp Humphreys. It's still there. The Camp Humphreys is the biggest military base in Northeast Asia. And then inside that military there will be like more than 20,000 soldiers. Anyway, so we moved down to the village, and the whole village was on the verge of like forceful displacement. You know, all the houses were like just, you know, leveled down, and then all the area was just disappear, and then U.S. military take over, and then, you know, they make a giant army base. But so to fight that, activists like me and many anarchists actually moved down to the village and started living there with the 500 villagers. And then that movement started from 2004 until 2007. Finally, we fought really hard, really hard to stop this military base expansion. But then we couldn't do it. We failed, and then we were like kicked out from the village. And this is a photo where we are building this observatory. That's what we called it, because it was actually higher than the photo. You look up to a higher point, and then you can see where the Korean government is sending the troops or the riot police or the thugs to take over or to destroy the houses. Actually, the Korean government started destroying those empty houses, and so I'm a very poor activist, you know. I'm a full-time activist, but then I don't do much like economic stuff to make money, right? And so like I live in a tiny house, you know. I pay monthly rent and that kind of stuff. But then when I moved down to the village, there were huge houses, empty houses everywhere, like 4 bedrooms, like 5 bedrooms. It was like my first time to use this whole giant house for myself. And so I was really happy to live in the village with all the like-minded people and the villagers who are fighting militarism. It was really great, and we had a lot of fun, like redecorating, like, you know, the whole house for yourself. Yeah. You can see that we like painted lots of slogans in the house, and yeah, well, empty house painters. And then you can see a series of photos how we meet and went to the village. Yeah, they're all anarchists. And then, yeah, we go down to the village like that. So rice paddies everywhere, like endless farmland, but those are farmers grow, rice everywhere. And so actually she was taking us to one of the empty houses, and then we moved there. Yeah, this house is also empty, like abandoned farming vehicles everywhere. And then we started cleaning the house because it was abandoned or destroyed many months, and so it was all dirty and stuff. People couldn't live, and so the first thing we would do is to clean the whole place and paint the whole house, walls, and the electricity was cut off, but then there were some experts who knew a lot about electricity, and so we stole electricity from the pole, and so we used electricity for free. And then water, in the middle we took some rest, and then they started dancing. It was fun. This was whole 2006. The farmers' resistance against the expansion of U.S. military started in 2004, and then this whole transforming the village into like a giant commune squats started in 2006, and so these people went down to the village and started living there with the original villagers. Yeah. We made songs, we released albums, we had numerous concerts every night. We made all the documentary films about the struggle. And as a matter of fact, we used the internet, and then we used the internet to broadcast every day, 20 minutes, 30 minutes of, I used to have a long hair, very long hair. I don't understand why I was taking this weird photos of people's food. You just, and then, this whole walls, repainted. And then the villagers loved this new decoration, and then they said, if you have a house and if you want to redecorate it, please use the paint and paint all the walls. That's how the mayor of the villagers said to us. Right. Yeah, so that was the farmers' struggle against the U.S. military, but then all the anarchists joined it, and then we transformed these empty houses into squats. And so the government actually cut off the water supplies too. And so I made this compost toilet so that without water we could resist for 10 days. Because you have to walk a long way to get all the water. It's actually one of the daily chores that you have to do, get water. And then I didn't want to waste water, and so I made this compost toilet, and it was really useful. When I first made this compost toilet, the villagers, they didn't like me. What are you doing, But then later they understood what it was and how useful it was and everything. You make a fertilizer. Nothing is, you don't throw away anything. And so it's like a natural recycle. And it was very ecological for us because we, we didn't have much resource to live there. And so everything has to be eco-friendly, not because we were wealthy, but we had to be. Okay. These are the cookies that we made So after the Pyeongtaek farmers' struggle, it was like 2007 and 2008 in Korea. This new right-wing, super like conservative party took the power, and then this new president, like George W. Bush kind of guy. He became the president of South Korea, and then this G8 summit was huge. In 2008, the president of South Korea went to Japan to join this G8 summit meeting with George W. Bush and Japanese Prime Minister and stuff. And so we organized another big protest against the G8 summit. And it was one of the actions that we did in the summer of 2008. Actually, there is a very good documentary film about the Asian activists. And there were many anarchists from all around the world. They all went to this big city, Sapporo in Japan. And then they did a week of anti-globalization struggle. And so this documentary film made by Hong Kong media activists actually captures the struggle. Actually, I am one of the leading characters in the documentary film, so I suggest you watch it. It's on YouTube, and the title is Good Luck, Comrades. So you type YouTube, Good Luck Comrades, then you can watch this whole film, 70 minutes. And that documentary film was popular in Hong Kong, Hong Kong's Human Rights Film Festival, Hong Kong's Independent Documentary Film Festival. The film was shown and won some awards. Yeah. And we made this cat cookies because G8, just pass it. G means rats in Korean, and so G8 means 8 rats. And so we organized this cat festival to catch those rats. You know, the leaders of the G8 countries are all rats. And so we made these cat cookies and then sold them. And so we were able to make a whole lot of money, enough money to send me to Japan and stay there for like 3 weeks. And so that's how I was able to participate in the anti-G8 summit struggle. It was really fun too. Oh my God, 2009, it was Yongsan struggle. It was a massacre. 5 activists were killed by Korean elite police forces, anti-terrorism unit. Like, what's the most elite police unit? SWAT team. Korean SWAT police was there, and then you can see those guy in the container. Actually, he's a Korean SWAT police team member, and then they were like cracking down on the forcefully evicted people's resistance. You know, eviction or anti-eviction is a big part of Korean social movement, and they are very radical because at many times those are big construction companies like Samsung and Hyundai, or like all the big companies in Korea are military industrial complex, and they do business in all areas, like making vehicles, like life insurance, like health business, and like construction business. And so anyway, they were there. And so these tenants, those poor people who had no place to live, you know, what they did is to make a resisting fortress, like made by like metal stuff, and then they continue their resistance inside the fortress for months, refused to leave the building that they, were like forced to leave. And then, like months later, the landowners or like big developing companies just give up and they sign deals with the people. But then, so the forcefully evicted people knew that if they set up this resisting fortress, and then if they succeeded in maintaining their resistance for like a couple of months or 3 months, then they could win the rights to continue their living in somewhere else, because the construction companies would pay you some money to, you can live somewhere else. And so that's what those Yongsan evictee believed. And so they made this fortress on the rooftop of the building, and then they brought all the food and all the stuff that they could maintain inside the fortress. But then within 25 hours after completion of the fortress, the Korean government, the Lee administration, this brutal capitalist Nazi kind of guy, sent the SWAT team to forcefully crack down on the resistance, and then fire broke out. And then the people who were inside, there were like 30 or 40 of them, but then most of them fled out, but then 5 of the activists were killed. They were burned to death. We don't so far know exactly how they died, because one of the SWAT policemen also died in the fire, but right after those people died, the prosecutor's office did the autopsy of the dead people, and then they took the bodies to the hospital, and then for a long time the family members of those dead people didn't know where the bodies were. And then later they saw the bodies, and then the ankles were broken and the ribs were broken, and there were many bruises and yeah, like scars. They were burned to death, but then we think that before they died, they severely were hit by those SWAT police, riot police. Yeah, popos. Crazy. And so, yeah, these are the like tall buildings that like Samsung construction company wanted to build on the rubbles of those small business buildings where those evictee used to run. Among those 5 killed activists, one of them used to have like Japanese sushi restaurant in that area. One of them had just a little coffee shop. One of them had just a small mom and pop store. And those people were killed because they wanted to continue their business and life in the same area. But then the price of the land became so expensive after they built those huge buildings nearby, so they couldn't just afford it, and so they started resisting this forced eviction. But then it was so brutal. From 2008, the whole Korean society is becoming really backwards, and it feels like living in a military dictatorship again. So many anarchists actually went to the area. It's in downtown Seoul, but then the whole area was empty. But it wasn't empty because the area was filled with activists and the police and the construction company hired thugs. And so they were fight every day, and it was really traumatizing because we were hit, we were beat up by the police and the thugs. The thugs were scary. They were gangsters. They were like organized crime gangs, paid by the construction companies like Samsung. Samsung paid a whole lot of money to hire these organized gang members, and then they scare the just innocent people. If you continue your resistance, you get hurt. So just get out of the area. But we were there together with all different kind of people, like progressive people, all different kind of progressive people actually moved to Yongsan area, and then this whole building, we squatted this building, and we made that our headquarters. And then I made this all guerrilla gardening kind of stuff everywhere, because this whole Yongsan area, those thugs or the police spray painted like knives, or people with like no head or bleeding, or like skeletons, to make look scary. But then I planted all those plants, eggplants. You can see the peppers and the cucumbers and the lettuce. So actually, the forcefully evicted people were really happy to see something grow in those hostile atmosphere. And then we saw this exciting video on YouTube where like Western activists were breaking the asphalt and then like transfer that area into a garden. And so that's what we actually did. I mean, there is a movie that like this, we break the whole concrete ground, and then we pour all the dirt on it, and then we transformed that area into a whole like garden. It was really fun. But then like several days later, the thugs came, and then the whole plants died. But we continued, and so instead of like making like real gardens, we used this styrofoam boxes, so that if the thugs come, we can move those gardens into different locations. It was a guerrilla gardening. And then this struggle continued. The anti-eviction struggle continued in 2010 and 2011. This is a Duriban struggle. And the forceful eviction was so common. Like today, this similar thing is actually happening. Small business owners or just rent payers couldn't pay rent because the land price goes up, and then the landowners make you pay like double the amount of monthly rent all of a sudden. Like tomorrow they call you and, hey, you have to pay $3,000 a month. How can you pay it? And then like within a month, the thugs come and then destroy everything. In this case, they used to have a Korean kalguksu restaurant at the first floor of that building, and then second floor, third floor were different. But then the small business owners of the second floor and third floor were really scared when they saw those thugs, and then they actually fled, escaped, without getting any money from the landowners. But then the restaurant owner on the first floor, when she was kicked out, the next day she went back to the place by breaking the metal fences. And then she started the struggle. It was the Christmas Eve of 2009, when we were still in Yongsan struggle. We heard that news. Another different resistance started, and then we squat the whole building, the three-story and the basement building, and then we used the whole area into a like punk rock concert hall. And so all the punk rockers actually came to that place, and then like 3-4 times a week we have punk rock shows and film screenings and events like this. And so we used to have like anarchist info shop in several places, but then this Turiban building was, something like anarchist info shop, or something like this building. But it was illegal for us to use that building, so we were always on the threat from the developing company. But so we lived there 24 hours, 7 days a week, because we didn't know when those developers come with the force, the thugs, scary people with all the tattoos and yeah. Yeah, tattoo is it has a different meaning in Korean culture. Right? Yeah, it's a scary thing. So this is an aerial photo of the place. So you can see other places were already destroyed, and then we actually were able to stop the destruction of the building because we went in and stayed there for 1.5 years. So after like 540 days, we could win. It was actually the first time that those anti-eviction activists win a major victory, because the landowners finally gave up and paid all the money so that those two couple, the owners of the Korean restaurant, were able to open another same or better new restaurant nearby in Hongdae area. If you go to Seoul and Hongdae area, and then please go there. And Joyakgol or Dopet, so you can have free food. I can guarantee you that. They all love me. So at the Turiban Squad building, we organize all different kind of exciting events, like 3-4 times a week. And this web flyer is anti-nuclear concert that we organized at April 3rd, 2011, right after the Fukushima, right, the nuclear plant collapsed, and then like radiation was all over, and so like anti-nuclear activism, was a big part of this. Anti-eviction struggle. It was really interesting. All those different currents of social struggle met once we create this place. People like us need a place to maintain your struggle, right? You need a place to meet people. You need a place to have events like this. And so we used that place for more than 1.5 years, and it was a great struggle. And then, just like that, we made this garden. It was all rubbles, and then we took everything away, and then, actually it was a very painstaking job. It took me several months to make those soil fertile so that things can grow. Later we could grow radish and cabbage, and then and then all the vegetables we ate together. It was really fun and happy. Yeah, wow, it can go wrong, and it takes so long. But I don't know. I still have so many stuff to talk about. Just for example, Hope Bus thing. To stand in solidarity with the laid-off workers. In port city of Busan, there were many shipbuilding workers were laid off in massive numbers. 3,000 of them were laid off. And so they started this resistance to get their jobs back. And then this courageous women worker went all the way up to the high crane, and then she stayed there for 300 days. She didn't, go down. She stayed there, and then since the crane was sealed off, no police or the thugs could go up to take her down. And so we organized this big social rally, like in Seoul and Busan, since Busan is like 5 hours away from Seoul, and so we organized those hope buses. So it was a very horizontal way of organizing. No one like tells us how to, like organize a bus. So like people like me or people like her, like everyone, spread the story and we choose a date, and then in one bus, about 40 people can get on board. And so like there were more than 100 buses organized to go to the city of Busan, and we stay inside the ship yard, and it was a big pressure on the company and the Korean government too. Korean government was always, behind this, labor oppression. Labor movement has been always strong and powerful since the 1970s, and so Korean government did many things to, oppress the labor movement, and so we were there together with them. Yep. And this is May Day general strike. Strike on May Day. So we do street protests and rallies on every May Day. This is a slot walk that we did in. Oh yeah, question.
I had a quick question. For the person that was in occupying the train for 300 days, how did they get food? Because traditionally the cops will try to cut them off of food. How did they survive up there for that long?
So surviving and communicating were the two most important things. And so the cops actually occupied the ground, but then they allowed to send food up to her, or sometimes they didn't. So a whole week she was starving, and then like all the human rights activists went there. It's so humane, cruel thing to stop, giving off food. And so actually every day she long rope, long rope, and so we tie the food, like plastic bag, and then we give her the signal, and then she just pull the rope, and then she gets the food, and then there is no toilet, and there is no like running water for shower or anything, and so it was really hard. But if you really committed to it, there were ways. So I don't want to get too personal, but Kim Jin-suk. Was this name. Al Jazeera people actually made a very moving documentary news about her struggle several times. And BBC also made some documentary films about the struggle too. This is slot walk that we did in 2011 and 2012. Many anarchists were like female activists or LGBT activists joined in the slot walk too. And so it was another watershed moment for Korean social movement where feminists and anarchists and LGBT activists joined together for this slot walk. And this is the struggle against the naval base on Jeju Island. I said something in the beginning, and this is a peace movement, and I have been living there since 2011, when every other social struggle was finished. Well, as I am living there, I sometimes go to the mainland Korea and join the other struggle, and then come down to the village of Gangjong, where the Korean government and Samsung again is building this giant naval base to host this U.S. pivot to Asia thing. And so this island of peace with incredibly beautiful environment with all the endangered species, the dolphins, you know, the crabs, all the crystal clear water. It's all like contaminated and destroyed, and it's dying. And do we need this giant naval base when Korea has already many naval bases, and there is no direct threat from North Korea? We all know that. Why do we need a naval base? Because U.S. is sending its naval might into Asia Pacific, and so they need another naval base. When Obama actually announced its plan, you know, pivot to Asia, actually the Congress asked Obama, so how are you gonna pay for it? How are you gonna, you know, do we have enough money to build a naval base? Actually building that naval base for like aircraft carriers and nuclear submarines costs $1 billion. And the answer that Obama said to the Congress was, we're gonna use our allies' naval bases, or we're gonna have allies build naval bases for us. And this is one of them. Crazy. And the people on the island actually suffer the most because of this naval base construction plan. And so this is another village where young people or activists or anarchists move down and then live there to, you know, create this like alternative commune. And we have this large number of people supporting the naval base construction. I mean, you know, they are, you know, supporting the peace movement against the naval base construction project. And so actually some of the people here have been to this island to support the Korean farmers and fishermen and people's struggle against the naval base. It is still continuing for 7 years. Okay, yeah. I can go actually like many hours and hours, but then, you know, and time is almost up, and there are, I'm sure, many questions about this. I'm like really, you know, glad to answer any question that I can. So it's almost 9 o'clock, so any questions? It's supposed to be Q&A. It's supposed to be an hour of lecture and then an hour of Q&A. I said too much.
I have a kind of sentimental question. It seems like you and your friends and comrades have experienced like a lot of repression and things that you call failures. And I just wonder like how you go on, or what, like, I don't know. Yeah, just like how do you go on after experiencing that so intensely? Because you seem very like, oh, it was very fun and happy, and I love it.
Yeah, it's like many times it's hard, but I get support from a lot of people. They don't necessarily like support you directly, but then they show their support in many different ways, and they like help us like everywhere we go. For example, this Jeju Islanders struggle against the naval base. Actually, not many people move to the village live with the villagers together, but like around the whole peninsula, people support us. That's the thing that keeps us going. We know that what we are doing is right. It's justice for, it's a struggle for social justice and peace and environment. And so we can keep going as long as we don't get burned out.
Oh, can you say something about the endangered species and the struggle for the animal freedom? That something specific. I've read one.
Indo-Pacific bottlenose dolphin is one species that's endangered because of the naval-based project. There are about 114 population left in the whole entire Korean seas. This rare dolphin only live in Jeju Island in Korea. Well, they live in Japan and like India and like southern Asian seas too. But in Korea, only Jeju Island, we have this Indo-Pacific bottlenose dolphins, and they are so great. But then this naval-based construction destroying the habitat of the dolphins, and so they used to come to the village like every week. The villagers testified that they could see those dolphins every week, but then ever since the naval-based project started, the dolphins don't come ever. And so it's very sad, but then once we stop this construction, then we know that they will come back. And then, you know, like freshwater shrimp that's only found in Jeju Island, and narrow-mouthed frogs, and red-foot crab. They are some of the endangered species that should be protected, but they all actually dead. Most of them are dead. So we don't know how we can do this, but it's an environmental disaster in that sense.
I have so many questions, but I'll keep it down to one. So my father actually was introduced to anarchism in the Korean War in Korea, and so I had done some reading on the history of the life, but I've encountered more than a few times folks from Korea who are in the state communist tradition who have argued that the historical anarchists in the 1920s, 1910s, 1930s, and then the resistance movements, the burning of the land registries, etc., after the end of the World War II, they said that they were not anarchists whatsoever, and that it's so silly to call them anarchists, and it's you know, things that they said they had no contact. And I was like, well, I've read their papers translated. I know that they. But so my question is, what is that seems really disconnected. What is the interaction between the anarchists in Korea today and the more state communists, or the folks who have more authoritarian leftist perspectives?
I didn't get the
Okay.
last part.
It's South Korea. In South Korea, with the labor movement. Yeah. What is the level of interaction? What's that look like? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. Actually, there is this interesting part that I want to say about those Korean anarchists during the 1910s and 1930s. Actually, as many of you know, there are many different currents of anarchism in the world. But then Peter Kropotkin's anarchism, which he described mutual aid is the driving force of anarchism, as opposed to like competition, right? And social Darwinism was like so spread all over in Japan and Korea. Actually, those Korean anarchists believe that it was the social Darwinism, who made those Japan conquer like Korea and China, because according to the social Darwinism, you have to like get stronger and you have to win all the competition by killing the weak or the weaker. And so it wasn't just the animal, but in human society, the same principle can be applied to. That's what social Darwinism was all about. And then this Peter Kropotkin's books, challenges this social Darwinism very, very effectively than other anarchist books. And so most or all Korean anarchists were deeply influenced by the Kropotkin. And then, yeah, what they were doing was incredible. And then these days, Marxists and anarchists, we sometimes do things together in issues like this, labor movement, or this president, newly elected president, the whole presidential campaign was illegal because they used state apparatus illegally, like KCIA was used to influence people's decision. The police was used. The military cyber warfare unit was created to meddle with the results of the election. And so it was all a fraud. And so throughout the whole year of 2013 and up to now, we do a lot of demonstration together. But then we need to have a big demonstration. And so in Korea, many different groups like anarchist, socialists, or civil society, people, and not radical people, they all come together for this, demonstration to, demand the step down of the president. But in other cases, we do things separately. Yeah.
When I read about Korean history, there's often the sense that in 1987, this moment where there's a really massive wave of sort of spontaneous strikes in the South, kind of also relating to a really radical student movement and the taking down the dictatorship in that time. I'm just wondering what role, I guess on the one hand, I'm wondering what role anarchists, if there were anarchists in that. You kind of talk about anarchism emerging in the 90s, so I'm kind of wondering what the relationship was to these earlier kind of worker, student, and student movements in the late 80s, if it was just
No, or not many anarchists were there. There could be several individual anarchists or many individual anarchists, but then they didn't have any anarchist action in the name of anarchy or anarchism or things like that. So there were many radical students and activists were there. And then in 1987, when students were killed, when they were one of them were tortured to death, and then the other one was shot. The tear gas. He was shot. The tear gas in the head or something, and then he died at the demonstration. And then this big protest broke out all over, and then the ruling party presidential candidate apologized, and then the constitution changed, and then some democratic measures were introduced. But yeah, and then later, whole general strike was all over Korea. But then not many anarchists were there at the time. Those anarchists were there at the time were so-called traditional anarchists who had tied with the past, who were scholars, who were old people. They were all in their 60s at the time. The one big thing that they did throughout the whole 1980s, those traditional anarchists, was to have a very big international conference about anarchism in Korea. That took place in 1988. Those second generation anarchists, some of them became college professors, or they were politicians. So they became really weird. After they spent so much time in education and farming, some of them became politicians, and they make political party, but then none of them were elected. But then derailed from the anarchist spring, I guess.
So, from your relationship with QILIMBO, did he ever talk about any mutual aid societies he was a part of outside of the peninsula, or anyone he worked with in the first generation of anarchists who left the peninsula to form autonomous kind of communities like in Manchuria or anything like that? Because I've read about them, but it's never a primary source or never anyone's direct experience, and it feels a little bit like romanticized. And then the whole relationship they had to the Red Army and Soviet, it just feels like there's a huge chunk of history there that's missing. And I wonder if that person, or you've met any survivors of that era who would share with you that experience?
I met many Japanese anarchists who had like strong ties with the first generation of anarchist movement, like which was really popular in the whole East Asia in 1910s and 1920s, 1930s. But like Korean anarchists or Chinese anarchists, they all disappeared. Like those who fled to Manchuria, like those autonomous villages, like in many places, they all disappeared after Communist Party took over China, and then North Korea, and then South Korea became so like oppressed. Those anarchists couldn't continue their identity, and in order for them to survive, they had to like change their names or practices or identities. So after like 1945, we don't get to hear anything. No China, no North Korea, no South Korean anarchists existed after that. Like small number of South Korean anarchists continued, but then can we really say that they continue the anarchist practices? I don't know, but then they did inside their heart. But it was a sad period and harsh times for them.
You mentioned a lot like the role of translated text in the several decades when there were any anarchists in Korea or like active. Like, do you view anarchism in Korea as essentially a Western import, or does it grow out of other? Do you see it as growing out of other aspects of Korean society, or like something different? Like, for example, some like reaction to modern forms of state control.
That's a very interesting question too. And then actually I gave a lot of thoughts about it too. Interesting thing is we have this urge to do things on my way, like spontaneous way of doing things while not oppressing other people. Like we are all like equal, horizontally, right? And like our goal is to abolish all like authority and hierarchy, that kind of stuff. It's like nobody taught me. It was I was like comfortable with those things, and then later I read all those books about this, and then I found it really fascinating. Wow, like I was really surprised to know that like these like-minded people existed like several hundred years ago, in 1800s, and so at that point you become like more. You can be sure about like your anarchism. It's not just you receive influence from Western. It's like I think it's a mix of like influence from outside and then your like own tendency. and under certain social circumstances, it can grow really fast. Especially like during the Japanese colonial rule, when it was so oppressive and people needed like new ideological weapon, and then this anarchist idea gave them like ideological liberation by saying that we can defeat social Darwinism by adopting anarchism. Like they had this big thirst how to theorize my thoughts, and then when they hear about it, then it was easier for them to identify themselves.
I wanted to answer your question a little bit from a historical perspective. Probably the earliest form of anarchism in Asia comes out of Taoism, which is fundamentally opposed to the state, fundamental belief in spontaneity, and a fundamental opposition to any kind of authority. And that strain of Taoism comes down into Korean philosophy and history through the Neo-Confucianisms. And that combines with a general communitarian philosophy and collective philosophy of Korean society, which is very, very, it's a kind of indigenous anarchism, but at the same time, the counter threat or the counter force to that is traditional fundamentalist Confucianism, which is very, very hierarchical and very, very embedded in the state. So much so that the Korean language is one of the most hierarchical languages on the planet, and it's impossible to speak to somebody without establishing a relationship of power, which is why Joe and I are both Koreans, but it's actually more comfortable for me to speak to him in English than it is to speak to him in Korean, because once we start speaking Korean, there's automatically a kind of a jockeying for power.
That's correct, sir.
Is it okay if we take a couple more questions?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, by the way. This is really amazing. I really this I had kind of like, I had a lot of questions, but one important question I think was, what was the strategy of attack with the early anarchists in during that war against the Japanese? What was the strategy of attack from the nationalist Koreans versus the anarchist Koreans? Did the anarchists only attack the Japanese hierarchy, and did the nationalists attack common Japanese people, and was that a difference in strategy? And so I had that question, and then also I would just like to know more about accountability structures within the Korean anarchist movement, and mediation, and how you would deal with infiltrators within your movement, from the government.
So the first question is really interesting too. Though most or every Korean anarchist during the Japanese colonial rule targeted at the emperor, Japanese emperor. It was really interesting. While the nationalists and anarchists and communists shared some similar goal, but then it was the only anarchists who targeted the emperor system, and so that's why some of them tried to kill the emperor by themselves. So that was the reason why anarchists adopted this, so-called terrorism. It's not terrorism per se, but anyway. And then anarchists also spent a lot of resources and energy into building militants or soldiers who can actually fight against Japanese forces. and so they built many military academies in Manchuria. While the nationalist Korean who had nationalist approach to getting national independence was to build internal power or strong power or educate people or solve those problems diplomatically or resorting to the United States or the UK, the superpowers, and then convince them that it's so wrong to, colonize small countries like Korea. And so they use the kind of peaceful way, but then anarchists believe that those nationalistic approach were useless, or it didn't believe the power of the people, or they didn't like each other. And then second question, how we deal with those infiltrators.
Just internal conflicts.
Internal conflicts. I don't know if we have serious internal conflicts, then we go separate ways. Let's see. I don't know. It's always a problem how to deal with these internal conflicts. I wasn't really good at solving those internal conflicts. And there were many problems, and so I know that many anarchists actually stopped participating in those actions that we do because of that problem. But honestly, I don't know how to solve those problems when it gets really heated and stuff. But one other way of solving the problem is just continue what you are doing. So it's let's bury the hatchet and start doing things together later. Any other questions?